Weston Boyd clutched the wrinkled letter against his chest as he watched the dust cloud approach across the prairie. After 3 months of correspondence, Margaret Thompson was finally coming to be his wife. The schoolteacher from Ohio had promised in her neat handwriting to help him rebuild his failing ranch, to cook hearty meals, and to bring life back to his lonely homestead. Morning sun beat down mercilessly on his patched work shirt as he straightened his shoulders and tried to look like the successful rancher he'd claimed to be in his letters. The truth was far different. His cattle had wandered off or been stolen. His crops had failed 2 seasons running, and he hadn't seen another human being in nearly a month. The creditors were circling like vultures, and Frank Rollins had been making increasingly aggressive offers to buy his land for a fraction of its worth. But Margaret would change everything. Her letters spoke of determination, of building something meaningful together, of not being afraid of hard work. She was exactly what he needed to turn his life around. The wagon approached slower than expected, and Weston's stomach began to churn with nervous anticipation. Something felt wrong about the driver's posture, the way he kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting pursuit. When the wagon finally stopped in front of his cabin, the driver barely made eye contact. "Your delivery," the man muttered, tipping his hat nervously before climbing down to untie the canvas covering the wagon bed. Weston stepped forward eagerly, his heart pounding with excitement and terror. After months of loneliness, he was about to meet the woman who would share his life. But when the canvas fell away, his world tilted sideways. 3 massive figures emerged from the wagon bed, each one unfolding to a height that seemed impossible. These weren't delicate schoolteachers seeking fresh starts. These were Apache women, each standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broader than most men Weston knew. Their muscled arms and weathered hands told stories of hard labor and harder lives, while their dark eyes held secrets that made his mouth go dry. The eldest stepped forward first, her braided hair catching the afternoon light. Intricate scars marked her forearms like a map of battles Weston couldn't imagine, and her powerful frame cast a shadow that seemed to swallow his entire yard. She studied him with the calculating gaze of someone sizing up potential prey. "You are the one who sent for us," she said, her accent thick, but her English clear enough to make his heart race with confusion and fear. "I think there's been some mistake," Weston stammered, backing toward his cabin door while clutching Margaret's letter like a lifeline. "I was expecting someone else." A woman named Margaret Thompson. The 3 sisters exchanged glances that contained entire conversations he couldn't decipher. The youngest, who still towered nearly a head above him, laughed without any trace of humor. Her muscled shoulders shook as she studied his ramshackle property with obvious disdain. "Margaret is dead," she said simply, her words hitting him like physical blows. "We took her place." Weston's legs nearly gave out beneath him. The letter crumpled in his sweating palm as terrible possibilities flooded his mind. These women had somehow intercepted his correspondence, knew about his arrangement with Margaret, and had traveled here under completely false pretenses. But why? What did they want from him? The middle sister, whose braided hair was decorated with small metal ornaments that caught the sunlight, walked past him toward his cabin. She tested the strength of his porch railing with one massive hand, nodding approvingly when the wood held firm under pressure that would have broken most furniture. "This place is dying," she observed, pointing at his sagging roof and broken fence posts. "Like you, I'm not dying," Weston protested weakly, though he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. His isolation had been slowly killing him, turning him into a ghost haunting his own property. The eldest woman studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes. "We need shelter," she announced without asking permission. "You need workers. Perhaps we can help each other." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across his yard, Weston noticed something that made his blood turn to ice water. The wagon bore fresh scrapes along its sides, and dark stains marked the wooden planks where the sisters had been sitting. Stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The driver was already climbing back onto his seat, clearly eager to leave. "Wait," Weston called out desperately. "Whose blood is that? What happened to Margaret?" But the wagon was already rolling away, leaving him alone with three towering strangers who might be murderers, and questions that nobody seemed willing to answer. The blood stains on the wagon haunted Weston's thoughts as he watched the three Apache sisters examine his property with the focused attention of military scouts. They moved with urgent precision, checking sight lines, testing the strength of his structures, and studying the surrounding terrain as if expecting an attack. "Whose blood was that?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper as the eldest sister returned from inspecting his cabin's foundation. She turned slowly to face him, her dark eyes holding no warmth or explanation, only the cold assessment of someone deciding whether he represented friend or threat. "Not yours," she said finally, and Weston felt ice crawl up his spine despite the afternoon heat. The youngest sister had finished unloading heavy bundles from the wagon and was now examining his broken water pump with the focused attention of someone who understood machinery. She grabbed the rusted handle with both powerful hands and gave it a testing pull. The metal groaned in protest, but under her grip, water began flowing for the first time in months. "How did you do that?" Weston asked, moving closer despite his fear. "I've been trying to fix that pump for weeks," the middle sister answered without looking up from animal tracks she was studying near his corral. "Men try to force things that need understanding," she said. "You have wolf tracks here. Fresh ones. They've been watching your place." Weston had never noticed any wolf sign, but then again, he'd been so focused on his own survival that he'd stopped paying attention to much else. The woman crouched down and pressed her palm into one of the prints, measuring its size with experienced fingers. "Large pack," she continued. "Hungry enough to come close to buildings. They smell your weakness." The casual way she spoke about predators circling his property made Weston realize how truly vulnerable he'd become. These three women, despite their mysterious and possibly dangerous past, seemed infinitely more capable of surviving out here than he'd ever been. The eldest sister walked back toward him, her heavy footsteps deliberate and measured. "We will stay 3 days," she announced without asking permission. "Fix what needs fixing. Then we continue traveling." "Where are you going?" Weston asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted the answer. The youngest sister looked up from the now functioning water pump, her hands wet and glistening in the sunlight. For a moment, something almost like sadness flickered across her weathered face. "West," she said simply. "As far from here as the land allows." As if summoned by her words, the sound of distant hoofbeats echoed across the plains. All three women tensed immediately, their hands moving instinctively to weapons Weston hadn't even noticed they were carrying. The transformation was startling, from mysterious travelers to experienced fighters in the space of a heartbeat. The eldest sister's voice cut through the air like a blade. "How many men know you were expecting a bride today?" Weston's throat constricted as he tried to remember who he'd told about Margaret's expected arrival. "Just the mail clerk in town," he stammered. "And maybe I mentioned it to Jeremiah at the trading post." The hoofbeats grew louder, and he could now count at least 4 distinct horses approaching at a steady pace. The eldest sister moved with startling speed for someone so large, positioning herself behind the corner of his cabin, where she could see the approaching riders without being easily spotted. Her 2 sisters flanked the other side of the building, their movements coordinated like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario many times before. "Get inside," the middle sister hissed at Weston. "Stay away from the windows. This is my land," Weston protested, but the look she gave him could have frozen hellfire itself. 4 men crested the small hill that bordered his property. riding hard and kicking up clouds of dust. Even from a distance, Weston could see they weren't the type who came calling for social reasons. Their horses were lathered with sweat, suggesting they'd been riding fast for some time, and the way they spread out as they approached suggested they knew how to surround a target. The youngest sister had somehow climbed onto his roof without making a sound, crouching behind the chimney with a clear view of the approaching riders. Her powerful frame was coiled like a spring, perfectly balanced and utterly silent. The riders slowed as they entered his yard, their leader dismounting with the confidence of someone used to taking what he wanted. Weston recognized him immediately as Frank Rollins, a man who claimed to own half the territory and acted like he owned the other half too. Rollins had been pressuring him to sell his land for months, making increasingly aggressive offers that felt more like threats with each visit. Now, as Weston watched the three Apache sisters position themselves around his property like a military unit, he began to understand that Margaret's death and these women's arrival were connected to something much larger and more dangerous than a simple mail-order bride arrangement gone. Wrong got Frank Rollins called out with the false friendliness of a predator toying with wounded prey. "Boyd, heard you had some visitors arrive today. Thought I'd come by and welcome them properly to our territory." The eldest sister stepped out from behind the cabin, and Weston watched Rollins's expression change from smug confidence to something approaching shock. She stood nearly as tall as his horse, her muscled frame making his three mounted companions look suddenly smaller and less intimidating than they had moments before. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice carrying across the yard with absolute authority that brooked no argument. Rollins recovered quickly, his hand drifting toward the gun on his hip. "Well now, that's not very friendly, especially since I have business with Mr. Boyd about this property." But as he spoke, the middle sister emerged from the other side of the cabin, and the youngest dropped silently from the roof to land behind the mounted men with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. Suddenly, Rollins and his companions found themselves surrounded by three armed women who looked like they could break horses with their bare hands. Rollins tried to maintain his swagger, but Weston could see sweat beading on the man's forehead as he realized his tactical advantage had evaporated like morning mist. "Now, ladies," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes, "there's no need for hostility. I'm just here to discuss business with Boyd." The eldest sister took a deliberate step closer to his horse, her hand resting casually on a long knife at her belt. "Your business can wait. We were here first." One of Rollins's men, a nervous-looking fellow with tobacco-stained teeth, whispered something urgent to his boss. Weston caught the words Apache and dangerous before. Rollins silenced him with a sharp look that promised retribution later. "I heard there was supposed to be a schoolteacher coming today," Rollins continued, his voice taking on a harder edge that revealed his true nature. "Someone named Margaret Thompson." "Where is she?" The youngest sister, who had moved close enough to touch the flanks of the mounted men's horses, spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. "Margaret decided not to come," she said with deceptive simplicity. "We came instead." Weston noticed that none of the sisters had denied knowing Margaret, and the way they spoke about her suggested something far more complex than a simple mix-up at the stage station. These women had deliberately taken Margaret's place, but the question of why was becoming more terrifying with each passing moment. Rollins's horse shifted nervously under him, sensing the tension that crackled through the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. "Well, that's unfortunate," he said, his facade of politeness beginning to crack. "You see, Boyd here owes some people money. Important people. And we had an understanding that his new wife would help him get caught up on his debts." Weston's stomach dropped as the true scope of his situation became clear. He'd never borrowed money from Rollins directly, but he'd been forced to take advances on his expected harvest from men who worked for the land baron. The drought had killed his crops, making repayment impossible. And now he understood why Rollins had been so interested in his mail-order bride arrangement. The middle sister spoke without taking her penetrating gaze off the mounted men. "How much does he owe?" "More than he can pay," Rollins replied with obvious satisfaction. "But that's between me and Boyd, unless you ladies are planning to make this your problem too." The three sisters exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation Weston couldn't decipher. Their silent communication was so fluid, so practiced, that it spoke of years spent depending on each other for survival. The eldest nodded almost imperceptibly, and suddenly the dynamic in the yard shifted again. These women weren't just passing through or hiding from something. They were making a decision that would change everything, and Weston could feel the weight of that choice settling over all of them like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "We are making it our problem," the eldest sister announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Rollins's face darkened like a thunderhead, and his hand moved closer to his weapon. "That would be a mistake, lady. A big one that you'll regret for whatever short time you have left to regret anything." But before anyone could draw a gun, the sound of additional horses approaching echoed from the distance. These riders were moving fast, and their war cries carried clearly across the plains, sending chills down Weston's spine. Rollins went pale as he recognized what they were hearing, and Weston realized that their confrontation was about to become something far more deadly than a simple dispute over money and land. The war cries grew louder, and Weston recognized the sound that had been haunting the nightmares of every rancher in the territory for months. Apache warriors, maybe a dozen of them, riding hard across the plains toward his property with the focused intensity of hunters who had finally cornered their prey. Rollins and his men exchanged panicked looks, their earlier confidence evaporating like water on hot stone. "This is your doing," Rollins accused, pointing at the three sisters with a trembling finger. "You brought them here to kill us all." The eldest sister's laugh was cold as winter stone, devoid of any warmth or humor. "They are not here for us," she said, her dark eyes glittering with something that might have been satisfaction. "They are here for you." Before Weston could ask what she meant, the youngest sister spoke in rapid Apache to her companions. Their conversation was brief but intense, filled with urgent hand gestures and meaningful glances. When it ended, all three women moved with sudden, coordinated purpose. The middle sister grabbed Weston's arm with a grip that could have crushed bone and pulled him toward his cabin. Inside, she commanded with military authority, "Stay down. Do not come out no matter what you hear." "Wait," Weston protested, his mind reeling with confusion and terror. "What's happening? Who are those riders?" The eldest sister turned back to face him, and for the first time since her arrival, he saw something like genuine sadness in her dark eyes. "They are our brothers," she said quietly, "and they have come to bring us home to die." Weston caught the word for death repeated several times, and the way the three sisters tensed told him the conversation wasn't going in their favor. These women had broken some fundamental law, and their punishment was being decided by men who valued tradition over individual choice. Rollins, still sprawled in the dirt where the eldest sister had dropped him, tried to crawl toward his horse. The youngest sister noticed his movement and placed one massive boot on his back, pinning him to the ground like an insect. Her strength was so casual, so absolute, that Rollins stopped struggling immediately. "Please," Rollins gasped, his face pressed into the dirt. "I have money. I can pay everyone here. There doesn't have to be violence." The middle sister spoke without taking her eyes off the mounted warriors. "You killed our cousin. You sold women like cattle to be broken by old men. Violence is all you have ever understood." The Apache leader dismounted, his movements fluid and purposeful. He was smaller than the three sisters, but carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. When he spoke again, his words were directed at the eldest sister, and Weston could hear anger and disappointment in every syllable. The eldest sister replied with equal heat, gesturing toward Rollins and his men. Her powerful voice rose and fell like distant thunder, and whatever she was saying made several of the mounted warriors nod in agreement. Suddenly, the youngest sister called out in English, ensuring Weston could understand what was happening. "Weston Boyd, come outside. Our brother wishes to meet the man whose land we claimed as sanctuary." Weston's hand shook as he opened his cabin door. Every instinct told him to stay hidden, but something in the youngest sister's voice suggested this might be his only chance to influence what happened next. He stepped into the yard, feeling smaller than ever while surrounded by so many armed and dangerous people. The Apache leader studied him with dark eyes that seemed to see everything: his failed crops, his broken spirit, his desperate loneliness, and something else that Weston didn't recognize in himself yet. These women broke sacred law by refusing marriage to chosen husbands, the leader said in precise, carefully chosen English. "The penalty is death according to our traditions." Weston's heart sank, but the leader continued. "But they also spoke truth about this white man's crimes," he said, pointing at Rollins. "The spirits demand justice for both wrongs, and we must decide which takes precedence." The eldest sister took a step closer to her brother, her massive hands open and empty in a gesture of supplication. "Let us face our punishment after his crimes are answered," she said. "Margaret's blood cries for vengeance first." The Apache leader considered this, his scarred face showing nothing of his thoughts. The weight of decision hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, and Weston realized that whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of the three sisters, but the future of everyone present. Finally, the leader nodded once, his decision made. "The white man's fate will be decided first," he announced. "Then, we will settle family matters according to tradition and justice." As Rollins began to scream in terror, Weston understood that he was about to witness a reckoning that had been years in the making. The Apache leader's justice was swift and absolute, carrying the weight of traditions that stretched back generations. Rollins and his men were stripped of their weapons, their horses, and their boots, left to face the consequences of their crimes in the most basic way possible, with nothing but their own feet to carry them home. "You will walk back to town," the scarred leader announced, his English precise and merciless. "You will carry the message that human trafficking brings consequences no amount of money can prevent. Every step will remind you of the lives you destroyed for profit." Rollins's pleas and threats fell on deaf ears as the warriors gathered his confiscated weapons and drove his horses away. His face burned red with shame and the terrible certainty that his criminal enterprise was finished forever. The territorial authorities would hear about his crimes, and men with his reputation didn't survive long in prison. "This isn't over, Boyd," he called out desperately as the warriors began escorting him and his men away on foot. "I'll find a way to make you pay for this." But the eldest sister's laugh followed him across the plains. "You have nothing left to threaten anyone with," she called back. "Your power was built on secrets, and now everyone will know what you really are." With the immediate threat resolved, the scarred leader turned his attention back to his sisters. The three women stood together, their massive frames forming an unbreakable line as they awaited judgment for defying tribal law. The weight of their transgression hung heavy in the air. "You refused your chosen husbands," the leader said, ensuring Weston could understand the charges against them. "You brought shame to our family name. You caused the death of our cousin Margaret by involving her in your rebellion." The eldest sister stepped forward, her powerful voice unwavering despite facing potential execution. "We refuse to be sold like horses to men who would break our spirits," she said. "We chose honor over obedience. Margaret died because she helped us choose freedom over slavery." The Apache leader studied his sisters for a long moment, then looked at Weston's property with calculating eyes. He saw the broken fence posts, the failing crops, the general air of defeat that had surrounded the place when the sisters first arrived. Then he looked at the now working water pump, the supplies they had unloaded, and the subtle changes their presence had already begun to make. "This land is dying," he observed. "Like its owner was dying before you came." Weston found his voice for the first time since the confrontation began, surprised by the strength in his own words. "They saved my life," he said, stepping closer to the three sisters. "Not just from Rollins, but from giving up completely. I was ready to quit, to let everything fall apart. They showed me what real strength looks like." The youngest sister looked at him with something approaching surprise, and Weston realized he had changed more in the past few hours than in all the months of struggling alone. These women had given him something more valuable than a mail-order bride could have provided. They had given him purpose and shown him what it meant to fight for something worth protecting. The Apache leader considered this, his weathered face showing the weight of decision. Tradition demanded one thing, but justice and practical wisdom suggested another path entirely. Finally, he made his choice, and Weston held his breath as the fate of all of them hung in the balance of one man's words. The Apache leader's decision carried the weight of wisdom earned through years of navigating the complex demands of tradition and survival. "You will stay here," he told his sisters, his voice firm but not without compassion. "This land needs workers who understand what it means to survive against impossible odds. This man needs teachers who understand what real strength looks like." The three sisters exchanged glances, and Weston saw relief replace the tension that had defined their every movement since their arrival. They would never return to their birth family, never again walk the paths of their childhood, but they had found something different here, something that might grow into its own kind of family. "Your exile from the tribe is your punishment," the leader continued, "but it is also your freedom. You chose your path when you refused to be property. Now you must walk it to whatever end awaits." The eldest sister nodded, accepting both the punishment and the opportunity it represented. "We understand," she said. "We will make our own way, and we will honor the memory of those who helped us choose freedom." As the Apache warriors prepared to leave, mounting their horses with the fluid grace of men born to the saddle, the leader paused beside Weston. "These women carry the strength of our people in their hearts," he said quietly. "But they also carry wounds that may never fully heal. Treat them with the respect they have earned through their suffering." Weston nodded, understanding that he was being given something precious, not servants or workers, but partners who had chosen to make their stand on his failing land. "The debt you mentioned," the eldest sister said to Weston as the dust settled behind the departing warriors. "We will help you pay it with honest work and careful planning. This land is good bones underneath all the neglect. It just needs people who know how to heal broken things." Youngest sister was already examining his neglected vegetable garden, her experienced eye seeing possibilities where Weston had seen only failure. "The soil here is rich," she observed, "but it has been starved of proper care. We can teach you irrigation methods that will make crops flourish even in dry seasons." The middle sister tested the strength of his fence posts, nodding approvingly at the solid foundation despite the surface damage. "Good wood," she said. "It can be repaired and strengthened, like everything else here that matters." 6 months later, Weston's ranch was thriving in ways he had never imagined possible. The three Apache sisters had taught him farming techniques that worked with the land instead of against it. Their knowledge of water conservation and crop rotation, transforming his failing homestead into one of the most productive in the territory. The eldest sister had proven to be a shrewd negotiator, helping him restructure his debts and establish fair trading relationships with neighboring ranches. The middle sister's understanding of livestock and predator behavior had helped him rebuild his cattle, herd and protect it from the wolves that still circled the property. The youngest sister's mechanical aptitude had restored not just his water pump but every piece of equipment on the ranch. But more than their skills, they had given him something he hadn't even realized he was missing. A sense of family that was chosen rather than imposed, built on mutual respect rather than legal obligations or cultural expectations. Sometimes, when he watched the three towering women working alongside him in the fields, their powerful frames moving with practiced efficiency, Weston thought about Margaret and the letter that had started everything. He liked to believe that somewhere, in whatever realm the dead inhabit, she approved of what her death had ultimately led to: justice served, freedom chosen, and the kind of family that formed not from law or blood, but from people deciding to stand together against whatever challenges the world might bring. The ranch that had once been dying from neglect and loneliness was now alive with purpose, laughter, and the unshakable knowledge that some bonds are stronger than any force that tries to break them. And Weston Boyd, who had once been the loneliest man in the territory, never felt alone again. Retry